Hi, this is GlowsCrafts and today I'm going to be doing watercolour. Now watercolour isn't something that I usually do, so I've only ever done a little bit of this. So just bear with me, I'm going to experiment and see how it goes. There are two methods with watercolour. You can either apply the watercolour to the watercolour card that is dry. The other way to do it so that the colours blend more is to actually wet your watercolour paper with water first in the area that you're going to be colouring and then apply the paint. So today I'm going to use the water first method because I want some shading and depth and tone to the sunflowers. So I'm using two fine brushes today because there's quite fine details. And it's also, when you're getting set up, it's also handy to have a bit of kitchen roll just to blot so they're not too wet. One thing with watercolours, what I have done many years ago when I tried watercolours and failed miserably, was I was adding too much water. And too much water can make the card buckle as well. Right, so to try and create depth and shade, the colours would be darker nearer the centre. So I'm going to try the petals first. I'm going to choose a nice sunflower yellow. Again, try not to add too much water, but make sure you get plenty of water there. These paints that I'm using, it's a palette I got from Hobbycraft, and at the moment I do believe they're half price. I think you'll find they're about £4. So I have my paint ready and wet, so I'm now going to take another brush and I'm only going to wet the petals that I want to colour in. The water will flow into the areas where the water is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spit too much water there. So it's trial and error. As I say, I don't usually actually do painting very much, so this is just trial and error for me too. So I'm just doing a few leaves. I'm doing petals. I'm doing alternate ones because, as you see, when I start to add the water, what's going to happen is they're going to flow. So the other brush, I'm going to choose a darker orange. So I'll get this one ready. Okay, so the paints can dry out a bit. There we go, there's plenty there. Most palettes nowadays, you can mix the colours. If I needed a certain shade, I wanted this a bit lighter or darker, I could use the little palette bits at the side. So take this and you'll see the paint spreads out a little bit. So I've done each alternate one like that. And with watercolour, it doesn't matter too much if you go over the edge. So you'll see how I've got the lighter colour. Now take the darker colour. And the idea is that these colours, can you see there how it's starting to blend and bleed? So they'll actually fuse in together to create slightly different shade in the middle. And it's just, I think it probably comes with practice. But the thing with watercolour is it really doesn't need to be perfect. And you can see how I'm blending the colours now, getting light to dark. Now my mum used to do a lot of watercolouring, and she particularly liked to do the fairies and butterflies. So this first one that I'm doing is a sunflower. It's going to be a practice piece, but the next one I'm going to do, it's got a butterfly in it, so I'm going to be doing that for my mum. because at the moment we can't see each other. She lives too far away. Right, so I'm going to take, these are my two brushes. So the brush that I've only got water on, I'm going to blot the water off so I don't have too much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that lighter yellow and I'm going to start to flick it. And you see how I'm creating different tones here of the yellow? And then if I've got a hard line, I can just go over it. See there how I've got a hard line between the two colours? So I'll just take a little bit of water, make sure to blot it off. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the yellow and take it into the orange, and you'll see how that instantly makes it a lot lighter. And then it's just keep going basically. So as I said, I'm doing alternate ones so that it doesn't bleed. When those are dry, what I'll do is I'll do the ones in between. Welcome back. Now that's the first layer done there. As you see, these ones are still a little bit wet. Now if I went to paint right beside them, the paint could possibly bleed. So I'll start at the top. These ones here are already dry. So I'm going to do, as you see, I've done like the top layer of the flower here. So I'm going to concentrate on the next layer. As you'll see, there's about 3 layers. So I'm just doing a layer at a time, and I want each layer to be slightly different in colour. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to use the bright yellow this time and a light yellow. So again, I'm just experimenting. I've actually noticed there's quite a nice orange there as well, so that's a possibility. That's maybe a possibility. The outside, which is underneath layer of petals, I want them to be the bright orange. So let's have a look and see the colours I've got here in the palette. Right, let's take it over and have a look. So yeah, I'm thinking I'll probably do that yellow, and then for the outside one, maybe a combination of these two, because we've already used this orange. So this layer, I'll put the yellow and see how it looks. So again, I'm using a separate brush to just do the watering part, and it stops the colours from going muddy. I will change the water when I'm going to the green though. Okay, so again, I'm just going to do 3 at a time. That seemed to work the last time, so I'm going to stick to that. And watercolour is quite relaxing. So if I wasn't talking, I'm sure I'd find this very, very relaxing and soothing. Okay, so I've done 3 again. So this time I'm going to use the smaller brush, because I really don't want to touch the other ones that are dry. Right, so we're going to go for this yellow. What I've been finding, see, because it's hot weather just now, when I'm putting water on the palette, I'm finding it's drying out quite quickly. If you've got too much paint on your brush, you can just dab it on your palette and then come back for that. Okay, so I'm just going to do the yellow. And I'm going to try a technique I haven't used before. I've seen it on videos, so I'll have a go and see how that is. Now this is just water on this brush, so what I'm going to do is take that yellow and I'm going to drag it down towards the centre, with the idea being that it should make the yellow a little bit lighter. Well, I'm not sure if that's worked or not. Certainly looks okay. We'll just keep going and see how it looks. Again, it's all an experiment for me, because usually I don't do watercolours. What I have done in the past is watercolour markers. So the next one that I'm going to do is with the watercolour markers, and to be honest, because I'm not a painter, I really find the markers are a lot more easier to use. And when I've been teaching classes, my craft classes, and people say, oh no, I can't paint, I show them how to use the watercolour markers, and they're a lot easier to use and not as nerve-wracking as well. Because there seems to be a thing where if people say, oh no, I can't paint, and I've done that for so many years. I've had all the stuff to paint, because I've had this book of postcards for well over a year now. I've had the paper, the paint, the brushes, even the blue painter's tape. Got everything I need, and I hadn't done it because I was just too nervous and thought, oh, I can't do this. So again, it's just a matter of going for it. It really is just a matter of going for it and trying it out. It's only a bit of card. It's not the end of the world if it doesn't work out. But you know what? I'm looking at it just now. I think it's not bad. I'm happy with it, which is good. Okay, so I've done those 3, so I need to go and wet another 3 flowers. Now these ones here, I've got to decide which one is the middle layer and which one is the bottom. That's got a whole petal, so I reckon that'll be the top one, so I'll just wet that. And again, this looks like it's the next layer. And I'm trying not to get any water on the other petals that I have done, because watercolour can be activated again. Right, I'll just do this. Okay, so again, it's just taking the yellow, and I'm going to put the yellow only on the tip and then draw the colour in. Right, so I'm trying to remember, yeah, it was this one, wasn't it? And then this one. Now, I did try to grow sunflowers this year, but unfortunately, slugs really like sunflowers, so I ended up with just stalks, which is a shame because I was really looking forward to having sunflowers in my garden this year. But actually having a problem getting things to stay in my garden and not be eaten. The slugs are quite bad here where I'm living at the moment. Right, see how that one's quite wet? What you can do is, if you think it's too wet, don't want it to bleed too much, you can take a rolled up bit of kitchen roll, and I'm just going to dab that, and that takes some excess paint away. I think I'm going to do that with the next one as well. Again, it's just trial and error. It'll come with practice how much water to use. At school, I couldn't do watercolour. I either went between using not enough water or using too much water and ending up with holes in the paper. So I think at school, they're looking for perfection. Art is not a thing of perfection. It is in the eye of the beholder, and it doesn't need to be perfect. Because sometimes I have this feeling about, oh, what if I do it wrong? What if it's not right? It doesn't matter if it's not perfect. Okay, so I've done those 3. So yeah, I think the darker colour will look nice as the bottom layer. So I've been seeing a lot of pictures on Facebook of people sharing their sunflowers. So they don't just actually come in one colour. There's variations. And see how the colours bled over here? That's not going to matter. I can actually take the colour that's around the side and look, see how I can go like that and pull the colour. That's the thing with watercolours. Right, let's have a look. They look like they're underneath those 2. So I'm going to do these 2 here. And the paintbrush at the moment has got a little bit of pale yellow on it because the water's quite yellow now, but I'm not going to worry about that because I'm going to paint them yellow anyway. So again, because of the heat, my palette's drying out again, so just a wee bit of water. I feel that's a wee bit too much paint, so just take it off. And then we just follow it round again. So I let that layer dry. And I also have been looking at the palette trying to decide what colour to do. Now I did a little test of the red and it's more of an orangey red than a crimson red. So what I'm actually going to do, don't know if it's going to work, but I really want the edges of the sunflower to be really dark. They're the ones I've been seeing online and I really like the look of them, and that's what I'm trying to go for here. So these are all going to be the same colour, so I don't need to do alternate ones. But again, I'm only going to do a few at a time because we're having such hot weather just now. The water's drying quite quickly, so again, I'm just going to do a few at a time. And if you think you've got too much water, don't put any more water on, go to the next one and drag it, and then you can take the water off when your brush is a bit drier. Alright, so fingers crossed this is going to work. I have the idea in my head of what I'm looking for, but whether this is actually going to work is another thing. So we'll try this red here. I'm going to make sure I only have a little bit of it, because I just want this right at the edge there. See? You can see the water's making the colour move. I literally just want these tips to have that redness. Now this is watercolour card, and this is actually a postcard, and I'm planning to send this through the post. So one of my friends told me when you're using pastels etc, you can seal it using hairspray. So I'm going to experiment, and once it's dry, before I send it in the post, give it a little spray of hairspray, and hopefully it won't rain when it's in the post. So I'm going back to this orange that I've used before, and what I'm going to do is start from the inner part of the flower and flick that colour out. Right, I'm not getting a lot of movement, so there's not too much water here. The more water, well, I don't mind that, the more water there is, the more movement there will be. And then I'm just dragging the darker colour down so it blends, so they blend into each other. Now, between flowers, I'm going to wet the brush, take that colour off. Again, it's drying really quickly because of the heat. Again, I'm going to go here. And see, because it's darker against the other petal, we're still going to get that definition of the other petals. So I'm just going to flick it like that. Right. This one's got a little bit more water, so it should maybe blend a little bit more easier than the others, but as I say, it's trial and error. This is really just an experiment for me to see how it works, and just goes to show how hot it is today. My orange had dried up again. Goodness gracious, didn't realise it was that hot. But yeah, the water's certainly evaporating very quickly today. Yeah, this is too dark, I don't like it. So what I'm going to do is take some water and I'm going to dilute it. I'm actually going to take that colour to the next one like that, and then go back and take some more colour, and you can see how it's lightening there. Again, I'm just taking it to the next one. Now, I'm going to try something. So what happens if I put some more water? Will this colour disperse a little bit more? It does slightly. Yeah. And again, if I wanted to, I could blot that, but I think it's okay. I'm just going to leave it the way it is. Right, so we're back to applying the red. Trying to figure out which brush is which. Yeah, it's this one I was using, isn't it, the dark one. And again, the colour's dried out because it's so warm. So obviously that wouldn't happen if you were in winter. Right, so again, I just want a tiny, tiny touch of the red at the edge. And you can hardly tell when the colours are actually, look, can you see how the colour is harder to move and it's darker? I hadn't actually wet the paper, so that's the difference. It's definitely a lot easier when you wet the paper. Right, so I'll wet the ones next to it before I go in. Right, so now, can you see how it moves? So again, I'm just learning as I go along on what to do and what not to do. Right, let's get some more colour there. And with watercolour, once it's dry, you can actually go over it and you can layer the colour up. Right, back to the orange. Oh, that was that one that was dry, wasn't it? You can tell, because the colour just doesn't drag. It's almost like it's like a dry brush effect, and that's the best way to describe it. There we go, that's it, flowing now and moving. So I'm just going to take those colours into each other and blend. Again, that's a little bit dark compared to those, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to darken these a little bit. I think that's not working, so what I'll do is I'll try the adding water technique and take some colour off of it, and I'm going to blot that and see if that helps. Oh yeah, that's better. Just felt the colour was too dark there. Right, so I'm going to take that orange I'm going to add plenty of water to this time. Give it a good mix. Right. These ones I'm not so happy about, but it doesn't matter. It's not going to matter. Right, I'll take some water, try and blend that. I might actually blot that again. As you can see, you can lift the colour up quite easily if you put too much on. So they're quite forgiving. Apparently this one needs to be a bit darker. Again, I'm going to blot that and see how we go, because those are a lot paler. You can tell the difference between the water and not a lot of water. Ah, that's better. Okay, I'm just going to leave it like that. Right, so what are the next ones? So adding the water, although it's just a little bit of difference, it does make a lot of difference just adding that tiny bit of water. Even though it is an actual watercolour, it still needs that little bit more if you're going to do like a blending technique. Again, just want, oh, that's the orange. Again, just a tiny little bit. You can see how that little bit of red, when I go to add the orange that I have already used in this painting, you can see how it does actually change the colour. Just adding that little bit of red does make it a lot darker. And if you want to dry your watercolour painting really quickly, you can use a hairdryer or a heat gun, preferably an artist's heat gun, not the kind for stripping paint. That wouldn't be good. Your actual paper would go on fire. Right, so let's see. So again, I'm going to wet this paper. Now, see here, you can see I've got pools of water. If I was to use the hairdryer method on this, what would happen is those pools of water, they would move slightly, and you might end up with a ridge of light and dark. Now, see this one here, how it looks like it's got one underneath. I'm not going to take my water all the way to the edge, just to there, and that'll stop that bit bleeding. So it almost looks like there's another layer, so I'll do that a different colour. I'll probably do that the solid red. Right. Let's see. I find it quite hard in the light to see which brush has got the orange and which has got the red on it. Again, my paintbrush is, see how it sprays a little bit. So I'm just going to take this to my palette and I'm just going to smooth it out a little bit against my palette. The brushes have came together a little bit, the bristles. I've had this set of paintbrushes when I was at college. Let's see, so that's about 26 years ago I had this brush set, so they've lasted a while. But yeah, this one's not so good. Okay, so I'm just doing some tiny tips of these in the red. And then we'll go for the orange again. That's actually quite relaxing. Oh, that's really bright, isn't it? Compared to the others. I'll add a bit of water. Add a bit more water to the paint. Again, I'm just blending the colours in. Finding I didn't quite add enough water there. It's almost as if I'm adding it to dry card, so I need to add more water to the next lot of petals. Yeah, it's amazing comparing the layers, how that using the red just at the tip intensifies the colour so much more. Now what I'm using here is a postcard from a book that I got well over a year ago. I'll show you it. I got this in the bookshop in town. Name escapes me right now. So you should be able to get these online. I'll hold that up there so you can see the barcode. What you can also do is, if you're not good at drawing freehand, what you can do is, if you get watercolour paper, get a ink pads and some stamps. Then you can actually stamp your own images like this and then watercolour them. You do have to make sure that it's alcohol ink though, because if you use normal ink that's for embossing powder, etc., that would actually bleed when you applied the water. So I've got a stamp set that's got flowers on it, and I haven't used it yet, and I'm thinking it would be quite nice to stamp the flowers and do the watercolour, so I'll maybe do that for another video. Again, see how there's a different layer here? So I'm just going to put the water in the one layer. With the idea being that the paint will only flow where the water is. Can you see that? See how you can see the little lines? That means that it's too dry, so I need to add more water to that. So it's a process of learning as you go along. But yeah, hot weather is not good for watercolours, I'm finding out. Right, let's try again, see. There, you can see how the paint's moving now, how I can flick that colour. Oh, do you see how that colour's travelling down the water there? That's the effect we're looking for. That's really nice. So back to the orange. Oh, sorry if you can hear that background noise. My son is making dinner. Okay, right, can you see? Can you see how the colours bled there? I'm just going to keep going. It's not going to... It'll wait a minute to fix it because it's so wet. See here, where I've put the water? I'm just touching it gently, hoping that the colour is only going to go where the water goes. If it doesn't matter. There. It's bled a tiny bit, but that doesn't matter. Okay, so here, I'm going to blot it and see how they go and see if that makes a difference. It's definitely too much here. I don't want this puddle. There we go, that's better. Now I'm just going to add some water to that bit. I don't feel it needs any more colour. Let's clean my brush. Just add some water to move the colour about rather than any more paint. Because there is quite a bit of paint there. That's it. There, that's better. Managed to save that bit. That's a lot better. So as you can see, watercolours, they're quite forgiving. And really it's not as hard as I thought it was. Can't believe I've been putting off doing watercolours for so long. Right, I'm going to let this one dry before I go in and do the next section of petals. I'll come back to that in a minute. So yeah, the more water you use, the more the paint flows and the more it blends together. Should be quite interesting when I do that one, how much paint actually blends on that, because there is quite a bit of water compared to the other parts. What I'll do is I'll add a wee bit more water to this one. And then just go between the two to kind of even the amount of water out. Right, that's again. And the colour that I'm putting on the palette, it will be, if I want to use that later on, I can reactivate it with some water. Now there's a technique you can do where once you've done your watercolour painting, especially if you've done a watercolour background, you can either use a little mini spray bottle like one of these, do a little spritz of water, or you can use a thicker paintbrush and just tap. And if you tap water on, what happens is you tap the water on in little droplets, and then you can blot it off with a bit of kitchen roll. This is the red. You can blot it off with a bit of kitchen roll, and that actually removes the paint. So you can get quite nice effects with it. I'm not sure if I'm going to do that with this one or not. At the moment I'm considering whether to paint the background. I'll decide on that after I've painted the leaves. But I think a nice watercolour background with some splashes of water would be actually quite nice. Again, I'll see how it turns out in the end. Again, ooh, oh, I like how the colour's moving. Again, I'm just tapping it ever so slightly because this colour is going to bleed. I'm literally just using a couple of tiny little hairs from my brush just to drag that colour down. Now this bit here looks as if it's actually drying. There's still plenty of water here, so it should still move, yeah, like this. I'm going to make that a bit darker. Right. Okay, we're getting there. This one, I think I might have wet it, but it looks as if it's dried up again. So I'll take that for the next ones. Again, I'm going to leave that one to the very end. Because it's probably going to be the most difficult bit to do. Because it's got the petals close together. Okay, there's quite a bit of water on that one. So what I'm going to actually do is, here I'm dabbing the excess water off my brush. I'm going back in, and as I'm moving that water about, I'm actually removing the excess water as well. And again, still some water on the brush, and this one here is dried up, so I should be able to reactivate it with a bit more water. What I'm actually going to do is just drag that colour a bit down there. There we go. Right, so as I said before, I really can't believe how fast this paint is drying today. So I'm going back with the red. Tiny little bit in here. Probably just going to do that one, just really red. And back to the orange again. Jeez, it's drying there. This is the next one. I'm just going to let that colour blend a bit. This one here, I feel it's a little bit too dark, so again, clean my brush and then just go in with a little bit of water and just blend it out and see what's happening there. Where I've added the water, it's making the paint disperse. So it's going darker around the edges. So it's kind of creating depth, and it takes some of the colour away. Right, so it's back to this one here. I want to use a really thin brush. I've got this one. I think this is the smallest brush I've got. This one's so fine. Right, so I'm going to use this for all the different colours. Just see if I go back to my palette here, I can just reactivate that red. But yeah, I really need to use a fine brush for this one. And this needs a bit of colour as well. Okay, so I'm just taking a look around and seeing if there's any areas that I want a bit darker, and if I want to blend it a bit more. Again, there's these three here now. They're kind of lighter than all the rest, so I'm just going to go in with the orange again and just give that a little bit more colour. Again, just go to my palette here and take this colour. Right, I'm not sure how this is going to be. This is another painting effect where you have your paint dry and then you take wet paint. I'm not sure if it's going to make a ridge or how it's going to blend. I'll try the first one and see what happens. Okay, so yeah, it doesn't blend very well. So what I'm going to do is give some paint in the inner edge, and then I'm just going to take a paintbrush and just wet it with water to reactivate that so that the colours blend. And yeah, that seems to work. That's better. Those petals just seemed a lot lighter. And again, I'm just going to go in and I'm just going to darken. some of them. Leave some of them light and leave some of them dark. Right, so there's just a couple more bits to do. That one, I'll just do that in the bright red. Remembering to wet the paper first. I was just about to forget there. Especially with it being the brightest colour. It's important that it is wet. There we go. Right, now this inner one here, it would have been one of the yellow ones, but see how it's bent over like that? That means that it would be a slightly different colour. So let's see what I've got on my palette here. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take some of this yellow. I'm going to put it on my palette. And then I'm going to take a tiny little bit of that orange. And I'm just going to darken it a little bit. And that should create a slightly different tone there with the colour. I'm never sure whether it's tone or shade, I can't remember. That escapes me right now. Okay, so we should take this colour, and can you see how it's just slightly darker? It's just slightly darker there, so it's just like creating a tiny shadow. And then that bit that's curled over, that would be the same yellow that we'd used before. There. I think that's not bad. Not bad for my first attempt, definitely. The thing with flowers is every flower is individual. So it's one of the good things about painting a flower. Now, the middle, they're either like brownish or blackish, aren't they? Depending on what kind of sunflower it is. So I'm thinking this is going to be dark. Now, because I've got a bigger area, I can use the bigger brush. I don't need these wee ones until I want to add some more colour. So I'm just going to clean all my brushes. Tip that I learned years ago is don't leave your brushes in the water. Always blot them. So if you leave them in the water can travel up there. I guess it's worked because this one's about 26 years old and it hasn't fell apart. So let's see now. So I've got a soft brush here. I might try the big one and see, because it's a bigger area. So what I'm going to do is put some water in. Okay, the orange is kind of coming out of the water. Ideally I should have changed my water, but it's not going to matter too much because brown is in the orange and yellow family, so it's not going to matter. Right, so I'll do the lightest colour first, and then I'm going to add the darker colour. So I'm just going to test this on a scrap card that I have there. Yeah, that colour looks about right. So I'm going to do this light and dark. If the sun was shining directly on the sunflower, the outside of the seed head would be darker and the middle would be lighter. So I'm not actually going to put paint in the middle. What I'm going to do is put my brush upright and I'm just going to go like that round it. So what will happen is it'll start to bleed. And when I go in with the paintbrush, the other paintbrush in a minute, because I haven't put any paint there, that will be a slightly different colour. Okay, so now I want the darker brown, and again I'm going to use that technique where I'm using it like a chisel brush, where I'm putting it up on its edge, and that way I'll have control of where it's going. Just taking excess paint off on the palette. If you can see here, there's tiny little circles. I don't know if they'll still show through. I'm hoping they will. So again, I can just take the tip of the brush. It's all about how you actually hold the brush. And again, I can let the colours bleed. And I think when this is dry, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and put another layer of colour. And keep your brush moist when you're doing this. And make sure you don't have too much paint, because we're doing like a kind of like stippling effect. Right, so I'm going to take a smaller brush to blend these colours now. So I'm going to start from the lighter colour, and I'm just going to draw the water and the paint around like that. And I'm not going fully into the middle because I want that to be lighter. So now I'm going to go to the darker and start pulling that colour. I don't want to take it right to the edge at this moment. Now, I'm thinking I may have too much paint here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to blot this off and see how it looks. Now, when I was doing the petals, I had a thin fold of the kitchen roll. This time I want it in a ball. Okay, see how when I'm pulling that off, I'm getting this texture almost like the seed head would be. Yeah, I'm liking that. That's a nice effect. I'm just going around in a circle. I'm getting that mottled effect that I was looking for. Okay. Right, so I'm going to take the smallest brush that I have here. I'm going to try to just pull the colour out first. Yeah, that's fine. So I'm still getting the colour, but it's not going to make that brown bleed, hopefully, into the orange and the yellow of the petals. And hopefully I'll give it some depth and shade as well. Yeah, that's quite nice. Yeah, I like that. Another technique you can use to pull colour off is you can use sugar or salt. And what you do is while your painting is still wet, you can sprinkle that on. That would have been quite a nice effect to try if I'd thought ahead about that. So what you would do is, technique is, you have your painting that you've done quite wet, and then, sorry about that, that was the door. You sprinkle your salt or your sugar crystals, and then what happens is that actually draws the colour away. And then when your painting's dry, what you can do is you can just scrape it off. And what I do is if I'm using the sugar, I keep the granules and I put them in a little jar, and you can actually reuse them. You can use them a few times. You can actually use that technique in silk painting. That's where I learned that technique from, which was a technique I also learned from my mum. I've learned a lot of things craft-wise from my mum over the years. So that's looking quite nice, but I want a little bit more darkness to it. So I'm going to take a little brush and I'm going to use some black. I want this more like a dry brush effect, so I've only put the tiniest bit of water on my brush, and I'm just going to do like a pounce effect. So you can hardly see it, but it will just give that a little bit of depth. Just adds that little bit to it. It gives it a little bit of dimension. Yeah, I quite like that. Okay, so I'm going to cut the video for a minute and go and change my water, because as you can see it's bright orange and it would muddy the green that I'm about to do, so I'll be back in a moment. Okay, so that's the sunflower dried. Now looking at these leaves, the leaf looks like it's curled. So the underside of the leaf is a slightly different colour. It's a bit lighter. So this section and that section I'm going to do it in a different colour. This other leaf I'm not too sure. Trying to figure out how it's curling. That looks like that's going to be the front part of the leaf as well, so we'll do that section there and that section there in the darker green. Now I'm going to use plenty of water for this. So I'm just going to add a little bit of colour now. I've got plenty of water in there. Now if you look at a leaf on a flower, the actual colours vary slightly as well. Sometimes you'll find it can be darker around the edges. So I'm going to use this green here. Again, I'm going to test it on a bit of card. Yeah, that looks about right. So again, plenty of water. So let's see, I'll go down here. Again, I'm not going to do, see how there's a little stem bit? So I'm just going to do the colour going down there. And see how I've added quite a lot of water? So I can now drag that colour out and move it about. And I'm almost getting a translucent look. And if I take the paintbrush and I dab, you see how it's slightly darker there. I'm going to go back over here and take a little bit more paint, and I'm just going to dab so the colour is slightly darker, but the colour's still going to bleed. I don't want to have harsh lines. You'll see how I'm going with this and the colour, It's just still moving about. That's just enough to give it that slight darkness. And what I'll do is I'm just going to take a brush with water only. And I'm just going to drag that colour into the middle, ever so slightly. Into the middle. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry. So I'll be back in a few minutes. So while that's drying, I'll do the second leaf. I'm just trying to figure this out. Okay, same green again. Again, oh, it's quite watery. I won't be able to move the colour about. So I'm not going to go all the way up to the veins. Well, that's quite nice how the colour's moving about there. That's darker. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use water to drag that colour about without adding any more. I'm leaving this bit lighter here because I would imagine there would be a slight curve in the leaf, so the light would be shining on that, so that bit would be a little bit lighter. Okay, let's see, it's not bad. Right, so while that one's drying, I'm going to go back to the other one now, which is almost dry. So I'm going to use slightly lighter green. I'm just looking at the plants outside my window, and yeah, I can see by my patio apple tree that it's definitely a lot lighter underneath. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that colour and I'm really going to wet my palette. And then I'm going to put some a little bit for mixing colours. I really want to water that down. I want to make sure I've not got too much in the brush. And again, I don't know if this is going to work, I don't know how it's going to be, whether it's going to be lighter. Yeah. So just adding water rather than adding white paint to it does. Now, I actually forgot to add water there, but maybe that's a good thing because the paint's so watery. If I'd added more water to it beforehand. It might have been too much. As it is, it should stop the colours. And let's have a look. Yeah, there is a slight difference. So I'm not going to add any more paint. I'm just going to keep taking the paint from here and putting it there, so you can see how it's more translucent and see-through. Again, I'm using the chisel edge of my brush. And I'm dragging the colour across. And see how it's pulling. Where it's pulling is going to be slightly darker. So if we try and get pulls and actually drag the paint away from the edge, see how that goes lighter? So I'll do the same thing here. I'm going to block my brush. That's got too much paint. So dry my brush a little bit and see how that just comes off there. So it's not as watery. It's just tiny little gaps. Now I've only got water on my brush. So that was, if I just go like that just with water, see how that creates like a whitish halo. Right, so this one's, my palette's still quite wet. And I've got this, still got this over here. And again, I'm going to take the excess off my brush. It seems to be okay not wetting it the last time, so I'll just do the same thing. And yeah, it's very much more see-through with this colour. And again, although I'm using a bigger brush, I'm just angling the brush, so I'm only using the corner of it. So again, I'm going to go back to the edges like that. I'm just going over it once more, just so it darkens that edge. I'm just going to touch it up and see. Just any little white bits up. So I've got this bit here, so I'll add some more paint just on the chisel edge of my brush. I'm just going to dab it. Right, so the next stage is to do the stem. Now I'm going to need my smallest brush for that. And because that is so thin, I'm not actually going to add any more water. The watered down paint that I used the underside leaves for, I'm going to do this here. So I haven't added any water to this, so I've got more control about where it's going to go. Yeah, that's worked out. I think if I'd added water to it, it would have just bled everywhere. And then what I'm going to do is, for the other side, to create a little bit of shadow, I'm going to use the paint straight from the palette, so it's not watered down too much. Right, see how my palette's quite wet there? Kind of flooded, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that off. Because I really want this paint to be the colour it would be if it was just coming off the palette. So I want it to be darker. Yep, that's worked. So I'm learning as I go along here. Usually with acrylic paint, if you wanted acrylic paint to be lighter, you would add white to it to make a paler colour. However, with the watercolour, you don't need to do that. It seems you can literally add more water and it goes paler. There is white on the paint set. Use that probably to get more pastel colours in. Well, I'm almost done. It's not taking as long as I thought. And I think dinner's really nearly ready. Sorry for the noise there, I can hear the plates. Right, so that bit here we haven't got. Now, when this is dry, what I'm going to do is I'm going to see the veins, I'm going to go over them with a Spectrum Aqua. These are watercolour pens and they come in, they've got two sizes. You've got the big tip and then you've got the fine tip. So when this is dry, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that fine tip and I'm going to go over those lines. So I'll be back after dinner. Bye. Now the leaves have dried, I can see it's dried a lot lighter than I'd actually anticipated. The underside there I'm okay with. This needs fixed a little bit. So let's start again. So I'm thinking I'll use a smaller brush. And I've still got some green in the palette over here, so I'm just going to take it from there. Now, I'm just going to go over that, and you can see instantly there how it's getting darker. So you can layer up. Yeah, I'm more happier with that now. So what I'm going to do after I've put this second layer down is I'm going to add some just plain water to move the colour about a bit. Yeah, definitely happier with that second layer. Okay, so now add some water. Blow a tiny bit off. And now when I've got this, see how it's taken the colour away again? It's just moving some of that colour away from the veins. And I'm just following the actual shape of the leaf. I'm going like that. That's a lot better. This one here, haven't quite got all the edges. I'm not going to add any more paint. I'm just going to go with some water and just activate the paint that's already there. And just fill it in. Again, I'm just following the actual curve of the leaves. Right, this one here, it's too pale. So we had used the watered down green. So I'm just going to reactivate that and just give it another layer. So you can definitely adjust the colour by putting a layer of the watercolour paint on after you've let one layer dry. Now that's a lot better. You can see the difference from that to that. I'm a lot more happy with that. So I'm going to do identically what I did in the other one. Making sure my brush isn't too wet. So I'm going back to the main colour. I'm actually going to take a little bit from the palette just to make sure we've got enough there. So I'll just give this a second coat. You notice how I'm not going over the veins. I'm trying to avoid them. Now there's different things you can do to colour in the veins. You can use a pencil, or you can use a fine liner marker at the end. What I'm going to do is, because I've got the Spectrum Aqua markers, they're watercolour markers, because the point is so fine, I'm going to use that. But it would work with watercolour pencils, normal pencils, or as I said, a marker. Just make sure it's fully dry before you use the marker. Just going to add more water. Right. Again, going to follow the contours and just move some of that paint away. It just gives it some movement. And again, if I see any edges that I've missed, I'm just going to take a little bit of water and just go over them. Okay, so I'm a lot more happier with that now. It's looking a lot better. So I'm going to give that a few minutes to dry, because the marker I'm using is watercolour and I don't want it to bleed. So that was only a few minutes there. So see how fine that is? It's very, very fine. See how fine that is? It's quite fine there. Very, very fine. So I'm just going to follow the veins. And it's ideal for this, as you can see how fine the line is. Right, and these veins here that I can see, I'm just going to follow them as well. And with this being watercolour, I could actually go over it. And soften the effect with some paint. There, comparing that to that, I think that definitely looks better. You can actually see how it's kind of bleeding here? You can see that's still a little bit wet. I'm just going to continue, I don't mind it bleeding a little bit. Now, what's happened in here is that the watercolour marker, the paint that's came out has bled a little, and it's actually separated the paint there. You can see there's a little white bit. With these markers, always make sure the lid's it's closed, it's got to click quite hard. Because I have found that markers, if you don't do that, they can dry out. So I'm just going to take my smallest brush and see how this goes. I just want a bit of colour there. I don't want that white area to be there. So let's see. Oh, yeah, it's spreading quite a bit. So I'm going to blot that straight away. Oh, that's not so good. Okay, I'm going to leave that for a few minutes. Let it dry, I think. Okay, I'm just going to go over this and see if I can prepare this bit. Yeah, that's not as bad. So yeah, I'll just go over that and see how I can take that colour that's went darker there and just drag it down. It's not as bad as it was. Right, I'm just going to leave it like that now and let it dry. So it's been a long time since I've done watercolour, and as I say, I've only ever really, I think, done it a couple of times in the past. But I'm quite happy with that. I'll hold that up to the camera. Yeah, I'm quite happy with that for a first attempt. And just turn it around, you'll see it's actually a postcard. So I'll send that off to someone. And it says it's Floral Still Life sunflowers. And the drawing is by Johan Teyler. Okay, thank you for watching. Bye bye.